Jason Miller never believed in fairy tales. Not when you're buried in student debt, working 2 jobs, and watching your mother battle cancer while your sister's tuition slips further out of reach. At 25, Jason thought life couldn't get any crueler until a stranger called with an offer that sounded like fiction. A wealthy, elegant woman nearly twice his age wanted to marry him. No romance. No strings. Just a contract. In exchange, she'd wipe out his family's financial ruin. It felt wrong, but also like the only way out. So, Jason said yes. But what started as a business arrangement quickly twisted into something darker. Behind the marble columns of her estate were locked doors, strange whispers, and a past that refused to die. He wasn't just her husband, he was her pawn in a game set in motion decades earlier, long before he was even born. And when Jason finally discovered the truth, it wasn't just his freedom on the line, it was everything he thought he knew about his family, his choices, and himself. Because some contracts don't come with escape clauses. And some people don't want redemption. They want revenge. Would you sign your soul away to save the ones you love? The rain hadn't let up in days. It smeared the windows of the cramped apartment like nature itself was trying to wash away Jason Miller's life. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at a crumpled medical bill, the ink bleeding slightly where his fingers had gripped it too tightly. His mom's chemo had been successful, but the price? Over $60,000, and that didn't include the ambulance ride or the 4-night ICU stay when she collapsed from fatigue. Next to it sat his sister's tuition invoice. Another $18,000 due in 2 months. He was 25 years old. A third-year law student juggling coursework and working night shifts at a gas station just outside of Portland. He was smart, sharp, even, but smarts didn't pay hospital bills. Debt collectors weren't interested in GPA scores. They wanted money. Now. Jason's phone buzzed, shattering the silence. The number was unknown. Jason Miller? The voice on the other end was female, calm, and unsettlingly poised. My name is Vivian Hartley. I'd like to discuss your financial situation. Jason blinked. How do you know about? I know enough, she said. Meet me at Hartley House tonight. 7 o'clock sharp. Then the line went dead. He stared at his phone, stunned. Hartley House wasn't a place, it was the place. A sprawling mansion on the edge of town, more museum than home. The rumors around it ranged from mafia ties to secret art collections. All Jason knew was that no one got invited there. Especially not broke law students with overdue utility bills. At 6:58, he stood on the mansion's marble steps, soaked to the bone. A butler opened the door before he could knock. Miss Hartley is expecting you. Jason followed silently down a grand hallway lined with oil paintings and silence. In a drawing room with a fireplace as tall as he was, she waited. Vivian Hartley. Elegant. Statuesque. Silver hair swept into a chignon. Every inch of her screamed control. She didn't rise to greet him, only gestured to the seat across from her. A tea set steamed between them. Her perfume was faint, something floral, expensive, and cold. You're wondering why you're here, she said, stirring her cup. Let's not waste time. I know about your debts. The hospital bills. The tuition. I know your mother's illness drained what little you had. I also know you're smart, desperate, and burdened by a father's legacy you never asked for. Jason swallowed. Why do you care? Vivian smiled faintly. Because I need something only you can offer. He stiffened. Which is? A marriage. Jason blinked. Vivian set her cup down with a soft clink. Not love. Not intimacy. A contract. I want a husband in name. In exchange, I'll eliminate your debts, ensure your mother's care, cover your sister's education, and provide you with a generous monthly allowance. You'll want for nothing." Silence fell. The fireplace crackled behind them, casting shadows on the floor. This is insane," Jason finally said, half laughing. "You don't even know me." "That's exactly why it works," Vivian replied. "You're young, unattached, and you need me. I'm offering you freedom." His instincts screamed run, but another voice, the quieter one, whispered, "She's offering you a way out. A way to be the hero for once." Still, Jason had enough dignity to hesitate. "I need to think," he said. Vivian didn't flinch. "You have 48 hours. After that, the offer vanishes." He left in a daze, the storm outside seeming tame compared to the one brewing in his head. That night, Jason laid it all out for his mother. Her response wasn't what he expected. "You do it?" he asked. "I'm saying, maybe you should," she replied quietly, holding his hand. "Jason, you've carried so much. Maybe this isn't about selling your soul. Maybe it's about giving us all a second chance." He stared at her, unsure whether he was horrified or relieved. The next morning, Jason stood in front of the mansion again, a decision burning in his chest. Vivian opened the door herself this time. "You've decided?" He nodded. "I'll do it." She studied him for a moment, searching, calculating, then smiled. "Good. The paperwork will be drawn up. We marry next week." As she turned, Jason realized something chilling. She never once said thank you. The wedding was private, just Jason, Vivian, a county judge, and two stone-faced witnesses who looked like they belonged more in a courtroom than a ceremony. No vows of love. No rings. Just signatures on paper, exchanged in the hushed marble of a courthouse side room. She wore a deep navy suit. He wore the tailored tux she had chosen for him. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, she offered him a smile that felt like the closing of a deal, not the beginning of a life. "Welcome to the rest of your future," she said softly, then walked out ahead of him. They didn't take photos. That afternoon, Jason arrived at the Hartley estate not as a guest, but as her husband. The black iron gates opened slowly, revealing the same towering mansion he'd first entered days before. But this time, the grandeur felt heavier, like walking into a cathedral where something sacred had long since died. A butler named Harris greeted him at the door. Middle-aged, immaculately dressed, polite, but cold. "Your room is upstairs." "Follow me, sir." "Not our room." "Your room." Jason followed in silence. The hallways were lined with antique portraits, former Hartleys, judging from their stony expressions and stern eyes. It wasn't just opulence. It was legacy. And it felt like he had just been dropped inside a living museum. His room was absurdly lavish. King-sized bed. Gold trim on the bedposts. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with untouched volumes. A fireplace crackling softly under a marble mantel. It was the kind of room people paid thousands a night for in Europe. But it felt cold. Lifeless. There were no personal touches. No photos. No warmth. Just perfection, frozen in time. Dinner was served at 7. Jason entered the grand dining hall to find a table long enough for 12. Vivian sat at the far end in a silk gown, flanked by 2 candles and a plate of perfectly cut filet mignon. He was directed to sit at the opposite end, like some Victorian lordship ritual. She barely looked at him. "Settling in?" she asked, cutting her steak with a surgeon's precision. Jason hesitated. "The place is beautiful. But big. Quiet." Vivian didn't look up. "You'll adjust." Silence. "Do you, have many guests?" She finally met his eyes. "Not anymore." Something in her voice closed the subject like a slamming door. The staff moved like ghosts. They didn't speak unless spoken to. They didn't smile. And Jason noticed something strange. None of them seemed to make eye contact with him. It was like he didn't exist. On his third night, Jason decided to walk the halls after midnight. The silence was deeper than any quiet he'd known, no creaking pipes, no murmurs of life. Just the rhythmic tick of antique clocks echoing down the corridors. That's when he noticed the doors. So many doors. Thick mahogany ones, locked tight with ornate handles and brass plates bearing initials he didn't recognize. He tried a few. All sealed. Something about them unnerved him. What was behind them? Why were they all locked? When he asked Harris the next day, the butler replied without blinking, "Private wings, sir. Miss Hartley prefers them undisturbed." Private wings? In her own house? By the fifth day, Jason started noticing other oddities. A woman on the cleaning staff flinched when he entered the hallway. A chef avoided him in the kitchen. Two of the gardeners stopped talking when he passed, their eyes tracking him until he disappeared around a corner. At dinner that evening, he brought it up. "Vivian, why does everyone seem so tense around me?" She didn't even pause in cutting her salmon. "They're professionals. They understand discretion." "Or fear," Jason murmured. Vivian finally looked up. "You're a guest in a home full of history. Some people find that overwhelming. Don't let it bother you." But it did. That night, Jason wandered into the old library, a breathtaking room with stained glass windows and a rolling ladder along the back wall of books. He was drawn to a large desk in the center. On it sat scattered papers and a small, antique key. It was brass. Intricately carved. A strange insignia, a falcon wrapped in vines, sat at its base. Jason picked it up. It was heavier than expected. He looked around, heart thudding. No one was there. He slipped the key into his pocket. Back in his room, he turned it over in his hands. The falcon engraving felt oddly familiar, though he couldn't place where he'd seen it before. Was this the key to one of the locked doors? As the fire crackled beside him, Jason realized something chilling. He hadn't seen Vivian's wing of the house. Not once. He had no idea where she slept. What she did during the day. Who she met. She was always just there at dinner, like a figure from a dream. And more than once, he'd caught her staring at him, not warmly. Not even coldly. Just watching. Like he was a chess piece on a board only she could see. Jason stared out the window at the shadowed gardens below. Something was wrong here. The silence. The secrets. The way the house seemed to breathe without anyone living inside it. This wasn't a marriage. It was a game. And he had no idea what the rules were. The next day passed like the ones before, meals in silence, cold stares from the staff, and Vivian answering questions with just enough poise to shut them down without technically lying. Jason couldn't take it anymore. That night, when the house had settled into its usual deathly stillness, he slipped the brass key from his pocket, tiptoed down the marble hallway, and headed straight for the door he'd noticed earlier, the one with the falcon insignia etched into the keyhole plate. He paused in front of it, his heart hammering in his chest. If she caught him. He pushed the key into the lock. It turned with a soft, ancient click. The door creaked open. Inside was a room unlike any other in the mansion. No gold trim, no polished antiques. Just dust, shadow, and a bitter kind of silence. A mahogany desk sat beneath a faded portrait of a man, handsome, stern-eyed, with the same piercing gaze as Vivian. Her late husband, Jason guessed. The room looked frozen in time. Books sat unopened on the shelves. A pair of glasses rested on the desk, untouched. A faint smell of old paper and perfume lingered in the air. Jason's fingers brushed over a stack of folders tied in red twine. He untied the first and opened it. Legal documents. Lots of them. His blood ran cold. The names leapt out at him: Richard Hartley, David Miller, his father. Jason's eyes scanned the papers. Property transfers. Real estate deals. Contracts that started off clean, then slowly twisted into legal nightmares. And then, a sharply worded letter, handwritten in angry, slanted cursive. Your greed ruined us. My husband trusted you, and you left us with nothing. When Richard collapsed on the courthouse steps, it wasn't just his heart that gave out, it was everything. You took our home. Our name. Our dignity. Jason's hands trembled as he turned the pages. There were more letters. Vivian's handwriting, growing darker with each one. Her words weren't just angry, they were surgical, intentional, like someone carving revenge letter by letter. If I can't reclaim what you stole, I'll make sure your legacy burns with you. And then, his name. Jason Miller. Attached to a marriage application. Filed 2 months before she ever met him. Before that mysterious phone call. Before the debt relief, the dinners, the careful seduction of his desperation. He wasn't chosen. He was targeted. Jason staggered back, like the truth itself had punched him in the chest. His knees hit the edge of a low table. A leather-bound journal fell to the floor and opened, as if begging to be read. He picked it up. It was Vivian's diary. He reminds me of David. Not in appearance, but in the way he walks into rooms like he doesn't yet know he's about to lose everything. I won't lie to myself, part of me pities him. But the rest? The rest of me sees this for what it is. Closure. Control. And maybe, a small dose of poetic justice. Jason read on. Page after page chronicled her plan to manipulate him into marrying her. She even detailed his weaknesses. His debt. His mother's illness. His sense of responsibility. She had studied him. He'll think he's saving his family. But what he's really doing is balancing the scale. Jason felt sick. The room tilted around him, or maybe that was just the weight of the betrayal crashing down. It wasn't just about a business deal gone wrong. It was about blood. About grief. About a woman who had turned heartbreak into obsession and had made Jason the tool of her vengeance. Suddenly, the floor creaked behind him. He spun around. Vivian stood in the doorway, one hand resting on the frame, her expression unreadable. Enjoying your little field trip? She asked, voice cool as ice. Jason's voice cracked. You planned this. You used me. Vivian stepped into the room, her heels clicking against the hardwood. I didn't lie to you, she said. I told you it was a transaction. But you didn't tell me why, he snapped. You married me because of something my father did 30 years ago? No, she said softly, almost too softly. I married you because I had to make it real. And because revenge only matters when it's personal. Jason stepped back, bumping into the desk. This isn't justice. This is cruelty. Vivian's eyes darkened. And what was it when your father bled my husband dry? When he died ashamed and bankrupt while your family started fresh in another town? I was a child, Jason shot back. You were his son, she hissed. And now you're mine. Those words chilled him to the bone. She turned and walked away. Jason stood in the silence, unable to move. In that moment, the opulent estate felt like a tomb, and he was the one being buried alive. Back in his room, Jason stared at the ceiling, heart pounding, the diary clutched in his hands. He had walked into this house thinking it was his salvation. But now he understood. He wasn't her husband. He was her weapon. And if he wanted to survive, he'd need to become something else entirely. The morning after the confrontation, Jason sat motionless at the breakfast table, eyes locked on the untouched plate of eggs in front of him. Vivian sipped her black coffee like nothing had happened, composed, confident, utterly unfazed. "You've been quiet," she said, not looking up from the newspaper. Jason didn't respond. Her eyes finally met his. "I assume you found the room." He didn't blink. "You married me out of spite." Vivian folded the paper calmly, set it aside. "I married you out of necessity. Spite was just a bonus." Jason's stomach churned. "You planned this, down to the phone call, the timing, the debts. You knew everything." Vivian stood, walked over, and poured herself another cup of coffee. "Your father destroyed everything I loved. My husband. My home. My dignity. And then, he moved on like nothing happened. No apologies. No remorse. Just a new city, a new name, and a perfect little family." She narrowed her eyes. "You were never meant to pay for his sins. But life rarely asks our permission when it hands us the bill." Jason leaned back in his chair, his hands clenched under the table. "You didn't just want revenge on him. You wanted to bury his legacy." Vivian smirked. "Legacy is the only thing a man like David Miller valued. Money fades. Names endure." He rose from his seat, his voice trembling but steady. "You think this makes you powerful? That turning me into your puppet somehow levels the score?" "I think," she said evenly, "that revenge is a dish best served through legal contracts." Jason stormed out of the room. That afternoon, he found himself wandering through the library again, hands twitching with adrenaline. The more he learned about her, the more he realized he was inside something far more dangerous than a bitter woman's scheme. He was inside a legacy war, fought not with weapons, but with paper, silence, and control. She hadn't just tricked him. She had curated him. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that Jason Miller had spent years studying law. And if there was one thing law school had taught him, it was that every contract has a loophole. He called the only person he trusted, Rachel Moreno, his classmate and former study partner. A rising star in corporate law with a habit of digging deeper than professors liked. "Rachel," he said quietly, from a burner phone he'd bought in town, hypothetically, if someone was tricked into a marriage for malicious reasons and signed legal documents under false pretenses, could it be undone? Rachel's voice didn't miss a beat. "Hypothetically? Absolutely. If there's proof, letters, witness statements, financial manipulation, then you might have a case for coercion, fraud, maybe even conspiracy. Hypothetically speaking, of course." Jason exhaled. "Then I need your help." Over the next few days, Jason began searching the house, carefully, methodically. He took photos of the documents, including the marriage license filed before she even met him, the diary entries that proved intent, and financial ledgers that hinted at shady business dealings still ongoing. He had to move like a shadow. Vivian's instincts were razor-sharp, and her staff, especially Mr. Harris, had clearly been with her long enough to know exactly when to speak and when to remain invisible. But Jason noticed something strange. Harris, the butler, began leaving doors slightly ajar. He'd place files on tables without asking. He never acknowledged what Jason was doing, but he also never stopped him. On the fourth night, Jason found a sealed envelope tucked behind an old bookshelf in the drawing room. It was addressed to his father. Inside was a letter written by Vivian years ago, one she never sent. "You ruined everything. Richard gave you his trust, his money, his name. You spat on it. You smiled in court while my husband collapsed on the steps outside. Our son was supposed to be born that week. He died before I even had the chance to hold him. Do you know what it's like to lose everything in one breath, and watch the man responsible walk away untouched?" Jason stared at the letter, shaken. Vivian hadn't just lost a husband. She had lost a child. Suddenly, the story twisted in his mind. This wasn't about retribution anymore. It was about grief, hollow and rotting, calcified over decades until it turned into something colder than rage, purpose. She had rewritten her life to exact balance. Jason could feel the pull. Part of him understood her. That terrified him more than anything. He returned to his room, locked the door, and scanned everything into a flash drive. Then he did something he never thought he'd do. He hired a private investigator. Rachel recommended someone discreet, former FBI, the kind of man who didn't ask questions unless paid to do so. Within 72 hours, Jason had reports on Vivian's current ventures, real estate partnerships laced with forged signatures, investments fronted through shell companies. It was enough to take her down. But Jason hesitated. He looked out the window, down at the empty garden where she often stood alone in the mornings, sipping tea like a ghost trapped in daylight. Did he want revenge? Or freedom? Because they weren't the same thing. The next morning, Jason sat at the table again. This time, he didn't avoid her eyes. Vivian raised an eyebrow. "You seem confident." He smiled slightly. "I've been learning a lot lately." Her eyes narrowed. "About you," he added. She folded her hands slowly. "Careful, Jason. Curiosity tends to get people hurt." Jason leaned forward. "No. It gets people free." Vivian's expression didn't change. But for the first time, she looked uneasy. The next few days were a balancing act, half chess, half survival. Jason moved through the mansion with the same stiff politeness he had since day one. At breakfast, he made small talk. At dinner, he complimented the chef. In between, he smiled at the staff, nodded at Mr. Harris, and responded to Vivian with just enough charm to appear content. But inside? He was documenting everything. With Rachel's guidance and the PI's resources, Jason became surgical in his investigation. He placed a hidden recording device under the lip of Vivian's study desk. He copied emails when she left her tablet unlocked. He photographed ledgers and legal contracts she kept in a fireproof drawer hidden behind a panel in the library. And he learned something that shifted everything. Vivian wasn't just obsessed with revenge. She was rebuilding her empire with blood money. The documents exposed shell corporations based offshore, used to purchase real estate in Los Angeles under false identities. One investment portfolio showed fake appraisals signed by a man who, according to the investigator, had died 2 years earlier. Another file detailed falsified environmental compliance records for a luxury development project in Arizona, a project that had recently collapsed in scandal, costing dozens of investors their life savings. She wasn't just bitter. She was corrupt. And Jason? He was married to her. Legally attached. A liability if things ever went south. The realization sent ice down his spine. One night, while Vivian was away in the city for a private board meeting, Jason met Rachel at a late-night diner 40 miles out of town. He handed her the flash drives, a copy of the ledgers, and 3 printed photographs from the locked room. Rachel scanned the documents, her eyes growing wider with each page. "Jason," she said quietly, "this isn't just unethical. It's criminal. If you go public with this, she could be facing federal charges, wire fraud, securities fraud, conspiracy." "She manipulated me into this marriage," Jason whispered. "She's not going to stop. Not unless someone makes her." Rachel hesitated. "If we do this, you understand the risk, right? If she finds out you're building a case, she won't just threaten you with divorce. She could bury you legally, or worse." Jason nodded. "I've thought about that. But I can't live in that house one more day pretending I'm okay while she uses me as a front. I need out. I need this to end." Rachel slid a burner phone across the table. "Keep this on you. Destroy the old one. From now on, we talk through this. And Jason, be careful. She's smart." He pocketed the phone. So am I. Back at the estate, Jason doubled down. He began asking questions, not direct ones, but careful nudges. He asked Harris about the former staff members. Has anyone worked here longer than you? The butler's eyes darkened. Many have come and gone. Most don't stay long. Why? Harris paused, then said, they eventually realized that loyalty here is one-sided. Jason caught the look in his eyes. It wasn't just regret, it was warning. Later that evening, he found a second ledger hidden inside a hollowed-out antique book. This one was even more damning. It listed payments to lobbyists, bank transfers to Panama, and handwritten notes referencing a judge Jason recognized from a recent scandal involving manipulated zoning laws. Vivian wasn't just laundering money. She was buying power. Jason's stomach twisted. All this time, he'd thought he was dealing with a wounded woman stuck in the past. He'd underestimated her. She wasn't stuck. She was evolving. And Jason? He was the only one close enough to bring her down. The next morning, over breakfast, Vivian's eyes lingered on him longer than usual. She tilted her head slightly. You've been up late lately. Jason smiled easily. Law students never sleep. Her lips curled. True. But they also know when not to cross lines. Jason lifted his coffee. Then I guess I'm still learning. She stared for a moment, too long. Then, with her usual grace, she stood. Be careful what you learn, Jason. Some truths don't come with exits. And then she left the room. Jason exhaled slowly. She knew something. Or at least, she suspected. Later that day, he received a message from Rachel on the burner phone. PI confirmed Vivian made a series of large transfers in the last 48 hours. Looks like she's preparing to move assets. Be ready. Jason didn't sleep that night. He kept the flash drive in his jacket pocket. He checked the lock on his door 3 times. And in the quietest hour before dawn, he sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the fireplace, rehearsing what came next. He had the evidence. He had the team. Now, he just needed the courage. Because if Vivian Hartley caught even a whiff of what he was planning, she wouldn't just destroy him financially. She'd erase him entirely. It was a cold Thursday morning when Jason made the decision. The sky outside the estate was steel gray, the kind of color that mirrored the mood in his chest. Vivian hadn't spoken to him at breakfast. She barely looked at him anymore. But that only made her more dangerous. She knew. He could feel it. The evidence was in his bag: flash drives, letters, bank transfers, scanned contracts, and copies of her diary entries that read like the blueprint of a vendetta. Jason stood alone in the mansion's grand sitting room. The walls were lined with portraits of Hartleys from generations past, watching, judging. The fire crackled behind him, casting flickers of orange against the gilded ceiling. His hands were steady, though his heart was racing. Vivian walked in like a queen in exile, dressed in cashmere, calm, poised, but with a flicker of unease behind her eyes. We need to talk, he said. She gave a soft, humorless laugh. Do we? Or have you already said everything to someone else? Jason didn't flinch. I know about the accounts. The zoning deals. The shell companies. I know what you've been doing, Vivian. And I know why. She arched an eyebrow. And here I thought you were just another pretty face. I'm not my father, he said quietly. But I know how to finish what he started. Her eyes narrowed. Be careful, Jason. You're not the first man to underestimate what I'm capable of. No, he said. But you're not the first person to mistake revenge for justice. Vivian's mask cracked, just slightly. Enough for Jason to see the hurt still buried beneath the armor. A car pulled up outside. Tires crunched on gravel. Doors slammed. Vivian turned toward the window. Seconds later, uniformed officers stepped through the front door. Vivian Hartley, the lead detective, said, voice calm but firm, "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, securities fraud, and obstruction of justice." She turned to Jason, not with rage, but with something else. Sadness. "You really called them?" she asked. Jason met her eyes. "I had to." As they placed her in handcuffs, she didn't struggle. She didn't scream. She simply looked at him and said, "You'll learn one day, righteousness feels good, but it doesn't last." And then she was gone. The estate felt cavernous without her. Jason stood in the foyer long after the officers drove off, the front door still ajar, the wind curling in around his ankles. He should have felt triumph. Instead, he felt heavy. Vivian had committed crimes, yes. But she had also lived in a kind of emotional solitary confinement for decades, and he had been her final, desperate link to meaning. She hadn't wanted love. She had wanted to end a story she never got closure on. Weeks passed. Then came the trial. The courtroom buzzed with reporters, lawyers, and investors, all people she had hurt along the way. Jason sat in the back row, his hands folded, listening to every damning word. The prosecution laid out the facts with surgical precision. The money trails. The fake shell corporations. The diary excerpts. The recorded conversations Jason had risked everything to capture. Vivian sat stoically at the defendant's table, hands folded, expression unreadable. When the judge asked if anyone would speak on her behalf during sentencing, no one moved. Until Jason stood. A ripple passed through the room. He approached the podium slowly, aware of every pair of eyes on him, especially hers. He cleared his throat, then spoke. "My name is Jason Miller. And yes, I was the one who came forward." A murmur rose in the gallery. "She married me under false pretenses. She manipulated me. She violated my trust, and the trust of countless others. I won't defend what she did. But I want to explain why I'm here." He took a breath. Vivian Hartley didn't just set out to commit fraud. She set out to rewrite a history that destroyed her. Her husband was taken from her. Her child was never born. My father had a hand in that pain. She didn't want to hurt me, she wanted to hurt the ghost of the man who walked away from her broken life. Jason turned to face her. She wanted revenge. But I believe, deep down, she wanted something else too, an end. A full stop. He looked back to the judge. "I'm not asking for leniency. I'm asking for understanding. Let this be a chance for all of us, not just to punish, but to learn. Not just to condemn, but to prevent more stories like this from ever happening again." The courtroom was silent. Vivian didn't move. But Jason saw it, that flicker in her eyes. Not gratitude. Not forgiveness. But peace. For the first time since he'd met her, she looked human. When the gavel finally fell, sentencing her to several years in federal prison with the possibility of parole, Jason didn't feel victorious. He felt like someone who had finally put a ghost to rest. The mansion sat quiet and empty now, stripped of its former grandeur. The gilded chandeliers, the Persian rugs, the priceless paintings, all sold at auction. The staff had long since left. The silence that once haunted Jason now felt peaceful. He stood in the great foyer one last time, the marble cold beneath his shoes, the same place Vivian Hartley had once told him, "You're mine." Not anymore. The estate had sold for just under $8.4 million. Enough to pay off every debt his family had ever carried, his mother's medical bills, his sister's tuition, and even the final balance of his law school loans. For the first time in his adult life, Jason could breathe without the weight of survival clinging to every breath. But he didn't stop there. He set aside what he needed, just enough to live modestly, to finish his degree, and to pursue a career in public interest law. The rest? He gave away. He established the Richard Hartley Memorial Scholarship Fund, named after the man at the center of a tragedy that had festered too long in silence. Not to honor the legacy of power or money, but to acknowledge the cost of what had been lost. The fund was designed for students like him, those born into chaos, burdened by a past they didn't create, desperate for a second chance. It prioritized students with parents lost to incarceration, addiction, or financial scandal. It gave them a path forward. A year later, on a clear spring morning, Jason stood behind a podium in the atrium of his university's law school. Behind him hung a brass plaque engraved with the words, "The Richard Hartley Scholarship for Second Chances. May we rise not from wealth, but from wisdom." The room was filled with young faces, students, faculty, and donors. Some wore suits. Others wore second-hand clothes they'd pressed carefully just to look presentable. All of them were there for the same reason. Hope. Jason spoke without notes. "I used to believe the worst thing that could happen to you was being betrayed," he began. "But I've learned something far more painful and far more freeing. The real tragedy isn't what happens to us. It's what we allow it to make of us." He paused, scanning the audience. "Vivian Hartley taught me that. She was not a monster. She was a woman who mistook pain for purpose, who believed vengeance would bring her peace. But in the end, it didn't." He looked down for a moment, then back up. "She left this estate to me, not because she forgave me, but because she realized, too late, that her story didn't have to end the way it began. And maybe that's what redemption really is. Not being forgiven, but choosing to build something better than the ruins we were handed." The crowd was still. Silent. Listening. This scholarship exists because one woman couldn't let go of the past. But now, maybe someone else won't have to carry it. Maybe we break the cycle here. Today. After the ceremony, Jason sat alone on a bench just outside the building. The sun filtered through the trees. A breeze tugged gently at the lapel of his suit. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the letter. The last one Vivian had ever written to him. Postmarked from the federal penitentiary in Illinois. He unfolded it slowly, rereading it for the 100th time. "Jason, I never expected to write this. But then again, I never expected to feel anything for you. I chose you because of your name. But I underestimated the man behind it. You showed me that the cycle could stop. That we don't have to pass down pain like heirlooms. Revenge kept me alive. But you reminded me what it meant to live. I hope this house, this money, becomes something more than a monument to bitterness. I hope it becomes a beginning. Be better than me. Vivian." He folded it carefully and placed it back in his pocket. The sound of laughter floated from the courtyard, the first scholarship recipients gathering for a group photo. They didn't know his full story. And they didn't need to. All they needed to know was this. They mattered. They had a shot. They weren't defined by who their parents were or the mistakes someone else made decades ago. They were free. Jason stood, walked toward them, and smiled. For the first time in a long time, the past wasn't chasing him. It was behind him. And the future was finally his.